Financial advisors are amazing at telling you how to afford to retire, how to pace yourself so you can actually get all the way to the finish line. But unfortunately, what they don't tell you are some of the harsh truths, the reality, like I'm starting to experience. And now actually being retired for almost 2 years, there's a whole pile of feelings and thoughts and issues that we have, and sometimes internal battles with ourselves and our emotions as to how we deal day in and day out. And I want to talk about some of those harsh truths, because the dollars are easy to number crunch. But once you're done at the bank or at this institution, you walk away and you start having these feelings. The paperwork's done, but now what? Okay, well, let's take this from the top. And here's some of the harsh truths that I've seen along the way. You often get, the first point is you get this sense of you're being benched, and you're being benched forever. Have you ever played sports? Like, I've played sports many times. I played hockey, baseball, even a little bit of football in, earlier grades. And when you play sports, you always want to feel important. You want to feel part of the team. You want to feel like your team members are saying, hey, get in there. Come on, your turn. Sometimes, unfortunately, though, when you start playing higher level sports, and I've seen this actually happen in hockey, where sometimes you start playing double AAA and then you look down and you see on the bench and there's that one kid down there that just never gets ice time. He's sitting there, he's just moping, he's not sweating because he hasn't skated in 2 periods. And quite often they call that riding pine, or basically you're on the outs, you're riding the bench. And unfortunately, that's quite often for some people how they start to feel. They start to feel that they're from the outside looking in. And when you're retired, you often feel like you're benched for whatever reason. The decision to retire could entirely have been yours, or maybe the organization decided to push you out. Whatever the reason, the fact that you're retired or not necessarily working might now create new problems, new concerns, new thoughts, and you were never prepared for that. Those aren't feelings that you were ever mentioned, of course, when you're talking to your financial planner. And those people are great at getting the numbers together, but what they don't necessarily tell you are the feelings that now you are on the outside quite often. You don't feel part of any organization. You don't necessarily feel part of groups and teams. And quite often people look at you like, okay, he's retired, she's retired. They probably don't have much to offer. So, it's often feeling more of a sense of the water boy, if you will. And for lack of bad analogies, but that is often how it feels. The only time you're called upon is, maybe you've got relatives, or, you've got that odd friend that once in a blue moon reaches out to you, and usually it's something that they need from you or something that they want. And that puts you in a state of this feeling of, okay, I really don't have much to offer society, but you know what? When push come to shove, if you really need something, you're going to call me and I'll help you out, because that's what I've done for years. But it's really not all that bad. It's not sad at all in that sense. You just got to understand that this sense of being benched does come, it does go, and there is a certain reality of that. You've paid your dues, but look at it from a positive light. And this is how I've seen this. I've paid my dues. I think of the analogy more now to transition this into a positive conversation where maybe you were the star player on the team. Maybe you were that person that was a contributing factor. Maybe you were that center person or that left wing. Maybe you were that person that was everybody wanted on their line. Okay, fine, time goes on, maybe you're not that player anymore. But have you ever seen, and you see it constantly all over the place, where now that star player, they hang up their skates, they hang up their gloves, next thing you know, they're the coach. You see how that works? Your role doesn't disappear, it sometimes transitions. And so while you might feel like you've been benched, when in fact it may not be benched at all, it might be just a shift, a change in perspective, a change in contribution levels. Now, instead of being sort of that feeling of being benched, you might be on the bench, but actually helping the rest of the team in your own special way. And so on a positive note, this is the way I like to look at it. But these are feelings and they do happen, and your financial advisor likely will never even touch on it. Another thing that those financial advisors won't warn you of is the quiet can be quite deafening. Now, it doesn't seem like a big deal, and a lot of times, I've absolutely loved and reveled in the ultimate sound of silence over and over again. There's a lot of times you get in these busy meetings in your career, in your job, Whether it's the bosses, making noise, whether it's your coworkers are squawking, maybe it's the work environment's loud in general, but it's just noise, noise, noise. Even as I walk around out here, I hear background noise. I hear cars. I hear dogs barking. There's the odd roofer putting shingles on the roof. I hear footsteps. I hear rustling of the leaves and the odd dog barking in the background. See, these are all sounds. This is sound of life. But what happens quite often is you get this sense that just this normal ambient noise is just part of life, and it can be. But part of that comes from your workspace. Part of it comes from busy lifestyle, whether you're spending time, like I said, you're coaching or you're hanging out with, maybe your young ones, maybe they're playing sports. There's always noise, whether you're cheering and there's noise there's noise at work, there's noise in your commute at work. You probably got the radio playing, and noise is all around us. But there's a thing, once you basically pull the plug and you become more of, you could say, into the retirement mode, if you will, or you spend much more time alone, you'll find that sound of silence being quite deafening. Yes, and in fact, this is something that nobody ever tells you. Sometimes too much silence is actually hard to take. Have you ever laid there at night sometimes thinking in bed, and you're just laying there, and you get this tinnitus and this loud sound of silence just buzzing in your ears? Or maybe that is tinnitus from all the years of working in, construction, and loud industrial noises has actually been a contributing factor. But that in fact is a reason why maybe I get some of those sounds. But there is that sound of silence, and when you're alone, you can directly impact how much or how little, but there is that sound. Loneliness and silence sometimes go hand in hand, and sometimes people confuse the two. Silence is a great thing, but sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of that ambient noise. So either way, it's just an observation of mine that sometimes I'm just sitting home alone. In many cases, everybody's at work or at school, and I'm sitting at home and I'm looking out the window and I'm thinking, this is really, really quiet. Another thing financial advisors quite often don't tell you is, if you don't build something besides your wealth, which many people do, of course, as they transition to get later in life, they try to focus on 401ks, contributions to some of their savings, and they look at their pensions and say, I'm building. Unless you build something beyond your wealth, you may not actually have something to retire to. And that is such a sad state, and they quite often don't tell you, because when you sit down with your financial planners and your financial advisors, they talk the numbers, and that's what they're there for. They're professionals. They focus on their scope of work. But they don't necessarily imply that, okay, we're going to work on the financial side. We're looking at the rate of growth. We're looking at the rate of release and withdrawal. We're looking at, how much you have saved, and we can kind of blend that out and kind of talk about, starting heavy and kind of blend that lower as time goes on. They can kind of look at all the graphs and charts and the numbers and create a plan for you. But during all this time, quite often people just lose sight of the fact that there's other parts of retirement that are extremely important. Planning that they have no part of. Planning that if you don't plan, you're going to find yourself potentially very, very lonely. See, because a lot of times people do. They go through life, they plan, they put the numbers down. Again, they fatten up their 401ks. They look at what Social Security will be the cherry on the cake. They'll look at what other investments, and maybe they even want to plan to liquidate their house and downsize as part of their overall portfolio for retirement. The fact remains is, unless you plan other things, hobbies, friends, and unless you have something waiting in the wings that you're excited to jump onto, there is nothingness. And there can be nothingness. Now, fortunately for me, I was already getting into that state of mind that I had to get out. I just needed some peace, tranquility, silence, and I just needed something change in my life. And unfortunately for me, with the loss of my parents and dealing with all the executor business, and of course, then to transition out of the job, there was lots to think about, lots to manage, and lots to do. So quite honestly, now almost 2 years out into retirement, I barely had a downtime. I barely had a moment of downtime between, dentist appointments, trying to get cleaned up on some things that I've been neglecting, and, some doctor's appointments, dealing with bank business and lawyers and accountants, and, helping out the kids, and they've had things with school and work. It's been absolutely astronomically busy for me for the last 1.5 to 2 years. But had that not been a thing, had that been a planned retirement where, say, I retired by myself and I didn't have all those things on the go because maybe they had been past, years past, things could potentially be quite lonely. So you've got to be thinking as you transition into retirement, or even if you're anticipating the days coming, maybe you expect your company, sometimes they're buying people out, and a lot of these big corporations now are cashing people out, giving you a buyout and give you a package of cash, see you later, adios. If you expect that day might be coming sooner than later, or you're even anticipating retiring sometime soon, you may really, really strongly think about, what am I going to do? What will I do with my time? Is there anybody I want to spend a little bit of time with, that maybe more time than I have been in the past? For me, I find now spending more time with my family is definitely hit the sweet spot for me. I spend more time with them. I've been with them much more than I ever have on any given day, and I really find it very rewarding to me. And now this has all been it's such a benefit to leaving my workspace, and this last year and a half has been amazing. I have had the time now to spend with the people I want to spend it. I have had the time to manage some things that have been falling off the wagon. Again, like some financial things, some health things, I've managed to fix some of that up. So it's been an absolute fruitful year and a half to 2 years in retirement. And so it's just a word of advice that financial people won't tell you. They won't tell you that you've got to think about, what are you going to do with your time? What are you going to do with your space? Do you have hobbies? Do you have anything that motivates you, that gets you out of bed in the morning? If not, you better start thinking and coming up with something really quickly. Another brutal truth that financial experts often don't tell you is, once you retire, you go through this unlearning of what capitalism taught you about your value, your worth to society. As you work in these environments, you work for that corporate organization, you think your net worth comes from the value you bring to shareholders, the value you bring to the company, the amount of profits you can increase for the company, developing new technologies, new skills, creating teams. That all sounds wonderful, right? You're building, all for the sake of what? For further shareholder value, profit increases. That's right, profits. And a capitalism-driven market, which we all live in, it's very important when you're working and you get brainwashed, and quite often you're taught through your business, your company, what's matters, what is important. They give you all the acronyms and they scream rah rah, we've got to do this and we've got to do that, we've got to get better output here, and we've got to do better output here, and we need these charts and these graphs, and we need these bar graphs, and look at these pie charts are telling us everything, how we're losing up on available opportunities here, and we've got to scale this and scalability that. And it gets just nauseatingly a bit much. And so I live that world. Many of us have. But you get into that world and they make you believe, or even the system sort of creates this culture where you believe if you want to be part of that culture, you have to be contributing and productive in a way that is very focused to creating wealth for that organization. But see, this takes time to unlearn that, because that is not who you are. That's not where your wealth comes from. That's not your value add. We're just soldiers. We're just marching along in one of these corporate operations organizations, just marching along in line, following the lead, doing what the leader tells us to do. Okay, that's fine. We've got to learn to earn a living, and that's a big part of how we manage our lives. We need to say the things that they want to hear. We have to do the things they want us to do. I mean, ultimately, we're trading time for money. And when you trade time for money, of course, you're giving up some of your soul. Let's be honest. Come on. Have you ever done something the companies asked you to do and you didn't truly believe it? You felt like, this is really compromising my own personal belief system or compromising my own integrity in some way? Absolutely. I've seen that many times. Unfortunately for me, or fortunately in many cases, by the time I start to realize I've had enough of compromising my integrity, I made decisions to necessarily kind of pump the brakes on that. But once you start doing that, once you start pumping the brakes on what your company, your boss, your team is asking you to do, now all of a sudden you become the outlier, and the decisions for for elimination of job roles becomes much simpler. But that being said, you develop these skills and talents that are very, very specific to the company to make you productive. Once these skills either change, you lose your skills, or you're outskilled by somebody else, your productivity level drops, you're no longer relevant, you're no longer important, and these companies no longer have time for you. So this is just what it means, is your productivity is not who you are. Your productivity is what you did. But once you break away from that and that mindset, what matters most is the value, the interaction you have with others, your family, your friends, people. Seeing somebody at the grocery store and maybe holding the door for them, or they drop something on the floor and you picking it up and giving it to them. Giving somebody a hand, and that friendly little smile when everybody around you looks a little bit grumpy, and kind of breaking the mood by just saying one funny little quirky statement. See, doing those little things, having those great little interactions with people is more about making an impact on the world in a positive way. And when you work in those corporate environments, quite often you're too intense, you're fired up, you're focused. For what? That's not who you are in most cases. In many cases, that's merely you're just product of the environment that you've been created in. So create this unlearning, and unlearning these productivity rules that have been developed for you is just not practical. And you know what? As you start to retire, as you get later in life, you start to realize those things just don't matter. I'm creating my own set of rules now. I am going to be a little nicer to people. I am going to help somebody without having the expectation of them doing something for me. I am not necessarily looking over my shoulder, because everything I say and do is going to have some value and merit to it that benefits everybody. I mean, that's the problem with today's society. Quite often, everybody's in it for themselves. We know that. That's a reality. But if each and every one of us just did one or two little things, it's not even a major impact, not even a major issue, but one or two little things, again, that unwinds that idea of just being focused and driven just to get the end goal. But if it's not having a hanging, looming carrot, and we're just doing it for the reason of humanity, then maybe that's what we need to be thinking about. But it's that unlearning that becomes something that you're going to be working on, and financial experts certainly won't have anything to say about that. Another harsh truth that you're probably going to experience once you're retired, or later on in life, certainly as we age, we start to see this too. It's quite the harsh truth, but your financial planner is really not going to help you with this. And, by the time you realize that you want to start spending time with friends, sometimes it's too late. Many of your friends are sick, moved away, dying, or are just gone completely. It's a sad state of affairs, because we spend our lives spinning our feet in the mud, or wheels in the mud, thinking about, the next promotion, got to get to here for that hockey game, got to get to there to work, got to go buy groceries, got to go do some shopping. Oh, then I got to pick up the young one from band class. And it's called life, and we all get very wrapped up in it. But what's even more heartbreaking is when people double down and burn the midnight oil on their job. I mean, we can't help. We have commitments and family that we deal with. But there are things like jobs. When people start adding 10, 20 hours a week just because they feel specifically that they need to work a little harder to get that project done, think about this. What are you doing it for? You're doing it for the company to make more money. That's what it's for. It's not for you to have a better life, more fulfilled. It's for the company to make more money. And we've already said you're trading time for money. And when you're trading time for money, you're going to do whatever they ask. And many people get really wrapped up in that. And the idea that you spend all your waking moments trying to advance your career, trying to get that next promotion, trying to do what basically the expectation and above, because now we know in the corporate world today, it's no longer meeting the expectation, because a lot of us know that have these performance conversations. If you meet, there's does not meet, meet, and exceeds, and exceptional, and all these different connotations that relate to your performance ratings. It's an absolute joke, because it really boils down to not the value you bring, but there's a perceived value right? There's a perceived value that a lot of us can put on a showboat and show the boss or whoever it be that are making these performance conversations or having those judgments of you. It's all about how you can blow the right amount of smoke up the right person's back. Okay, that's really all it boils down to. And so if you're good at playing the games, but you're far quite often inferior at your actual job, which, trust me, I've seen a lot of that. And anybody who might be watching will definitely relate. You know that. Quite often it's the quiet ones that just get it done and they do it effectively, reliably, safely. Those are the ones that quite often get misjudged and miscalculated and underestimated. So why are you working your bag to the grind, if all you're going to do is get these kind of ratings and pushed out? Well, some people will work a little harder. They realize that maybe their job's on the line, so they might double down, work a little longer, work a little harder. But what is that for? Perception? Reality? I mean, ultimately, it's for shareholder value. So what you end up doing is trading all that time away, and you lose sight of what really matters. Friends, family. And quite often you give all that up, and you give it up, and it's so heartbreaking. I've seen it. I've lived it. I even went through times like that myself. And it got to the point where I went through such bouts of depression because I was putting in such extended periods of time where I was focused on the job, and I was working out of town, and I was doing all these extra things to try to, make money for the business, to stay employed for myself, and of course make a lot more money, because ultimately it's about money, right? At least that's what I thought way back in the day. I no longer feel that way, but that's something that I was feeling in the time. And so at that time, of course, all that mattered was just grinding it out, putting in as many hours as you can. But as you age, you realize, well, I don't want to trade as much time, because that money can't buy me time back. See, there's this sort of sense of loss, this feeling of loss. And like I mentioned previous video about the grains of sand through an hourglass, once those grains of sand are at the bottom, you can't flip that hourglass back and get that time back. It's gone. You can't buy it back. So as we age, we start realizing we've lost that time. But unfortunately, with that time and with this efforts and pushing and grinding and hustling and making money and revenue for these organizations, we quite often miss what's most important, our friends. And so by the time we realize that, by the time we're at a point where we're ready to actually maybe retire and get together with some of those friends, well, you've kind of burned some bridges. Many relationships are torn down. And in some cases, people just don't have the health there to sustain. Some of them moved away and some of them are just no longer with us. It's sad, but this is a harsh reality and a harsh message, quite often, that you will never ever hear from a financial advisor. Another harsh reality that your financial planners or advisors are really not going to share with you is that we assume when you retire, there's going to be these fireworks and this applause and fanfare, and it's going to be big and it's going to be exciting. And it's going to be a big moment for everybody. Guess what? Not everybody cares. It's just a harsh reality. Nobody really cares about you, and nobody really cares the fact that you're retiring, because most of your coworkers are still working. So while they might show up to the free barbecue and they'll shake your hand on the way out the door and, hey, thanks, it's been great working with for the last 10 years. It's been great, good luck. And all of these niceties that go round and around, and these chats that happen really impromptu, but more specifically, just casually, superficially, and quite honestly, not of any significance, or not certainly from the heart. People just say it because it's polite. It's no different than saying hello and shaking somebody's hand over a car deal or something. That's it. It's no more, no less than that. It's transactional. But we all assume that once we retire, it's going to be this big event and it's going to be important to everybody and it's going to be amazing, only to find out nobody cares. That's right. We're kind of on our own in that regard, And so this expectation we almost set for ourselves just sets us up for failure, because in most cases, most people just simply, it doesn't matter to them. Everybody goes through those moments. Some places it's not even that formal. Some places don't even get a barbecue. Some places you just get fired or let go or released, downsizing. Sometimes it's as cold and harsh as a company sending you a text and say you're gone, we'll send your goods to your house in a mountain box, and thanks for coming out. And you won't even get that. You won't even get a handshake. You may not even have the human interaction. And unfortunately, this is an ever-growing phenomenon that we're seeing in the working world, is that these companies just don't care. So this thought that we're going to have this big event, things are going to be exciting. And, even where I came from, 4 years earlier, there was other rounds of restructuring and layoffs, and other people were retiring a few years older than I. And some of these people, when they left, some of the people that voluntarily left, they did it under their terms and their pretense, and the company threw them a nice little party, and they had a barbecue, and they gave them that cheap little hat that cost probably $2.99 because they bought them by bulk, and they gave them that nice little Timex watch that they bought for $15.99 that they got by bulk from a wholesale supplier. And they do all these things, and then they put up this little banner and they send out a note to the team, hey, come congratulate so-and-so. And it kind of makes you feel special for a moment. But the reality is it's really not that big of a thing, and less people are choosing for their own sake to retire. Rather, more companies are making this decision for you. And you'll probably realize once you're in your 50s, more often than not, the decision for you to leave your job is done by the employer and not by you. So this expectation that it's going to be a big grandioso event, that you've left your business, your company, is likely not even a realistic or a reality anymore. That's something that what I saw back in the day when companies, small mom and pop shops are sometimes like that, or certainly a lot more baby boomers, and I see, some of what my parents went through. My father had a little bit of that, my mother not so much. But realistically, those days are pretty much come and gone, and it's very few and far between for people that actually get properly recognized in their day-to-day job, and even more specifically celebrated when they decide to leave on their terms. It just is not practical, doesn't happen anymore, and it's a sad state. But it's certainly something that your financial planners are probably not going to tell you about. Another harsh truth is retirement doesn't fix loneliness. It magnifies it. That's right. When you're busy and you're working in your career, you'll quite often notice that you're just busy. Life's busy. You're younger, you're faster moving, you're faster pace. Generally a lot of people have young ones, kids, and they chase them around from sports events, maybe swim lessons, piano lessons. They're busy, you're busy, you go to work, you're busy, there's people all over the place. Some of them you like, some of them you don't like. You could take or leave some of them. Your boss, as annoying as they are, they're there. There's people everywhere. There's people engaging with you every single day. And a lot of us, as we get older, we like to engage less and less with some of those people, especially the ones that don't bring value to our lives. And as we get older, we become more honest, brutally honest with ourselves, and as well with some of these people too. But that honesty comes from a place of being genuine with ourselves and true to ourselves and our own beliefs. But unfortunately, good, bad, or ugly, these people that you work with, and of course, your young ones grow up, they move out, they have their own families, your co-workers, of course, a lot of them, some of them you don't care for too much, some of them maybe you do like, but once you retire and once you get older, they all go away. And we've already talked about how that works. So the loneliness is not fixed when you retire. It actually gets much more magnified because now all those people aren't around. So if you felt isolated and lonely before, unless you have a way to mitigate that, you're going to feel way more lonely once you actually retire. But that being said, for me, in some cases, there are exceptions. So this is an assumption by many people, and it is a reality for many others. For me, in fact, it became less lonely. I was far, far more lonely while I was at work, if you can actually believe that. Well, many people believe that the hustle and the bustle and the hustle and the grind keeps you busy and active and keeps people around you, and that makes you feel part of something. The fact remains is when you're part of a team that, you can feel the change, change of tide of wind, the wind of change, if you will. And you feel of all that shifting, and you now all of a sudden see yourself as front and center and part of a team making making substantial leaps and bounds to a place where you're no longer relevant. You're isolated. You're not part of meetings, closed door meetings, and you're not part of it. You're part of that same peer group, but you're isolated. You're isolated, you're excluded, and now it makes you feel ultra lonely. There was days where I sat, and I've mentioned this before, I'd sit in my office, I'd close my door, and I didn't know what to think. I'd look out the window for 20 minutes because I couldn't make heads or tails of what was going on, where my life was at, how I got to this point, and what I'm going to do from here on in. I'll tell you right now, that day where I left on February 20th of 2024 was one of the best days of my life because that loneliness flipped the page. Now all of a sudden I spent more time with my kids, my wife. I spent more time around people that I wanted to be around. Did I lose a couple friends in the midst? Kind of, borderline. But we've also said that coworkers are not your friends, and generally I haven't really heard from them again anyway. So the fact of being lonely, if you can actually believe it, you could be around a crowd of people in the same space and actually be more lonely than if you're alone, if you can believe that. It actually does happen, and I was in fact in that position. So now I have to say that I was definitely far more lonely. That being said, financial advisors rarely ever speak to the loneliness factor, and that most people become far more lonely, and it becomes exaggerated once you retire. Anyway, with all of that said, everybody, I hope you all had an absolute glorious day. Absolutely beautiful. I can't even believe how nice it is here right now this time of year. Wonderful. I think we're going to go for another walk, maybe grab a coffee. But again, as always, be sure to share, like, and don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, all have a wonderful weekend, everybody. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.